that is something that has always attracted my attention towards the domain of design in general, right? Whether it is technical or non-technical. And there are some principles which are universal when it comes to design. So we'll be discussing all of that. And I hope this my background is clear to you. So we'll go to the next slide. Yeah. So the topics will be broadly covering in today's presentation is design thinking, right? And how design thinking is relevant in the domain of HCI that we are discussing. That the workshop is all about HCI. How does this design thinking concept fit into the black box of HCI that we are going to discuss today, right? And then second, there's something called as UX and UI, user experience and user interface. We'll be talking more about what are these two terms, how are these two terms different from each other, and what is the relevance of that. And then lastly, we'll be talking about AI. AI is probably everywhere. It's probably one of the most hot shot topic in the past 10 years that has arrived, and everybody uses the term AI left, right, center, even without actually understanding what AI is. But we will get a fair idea of what AI is and how is AI impacting the way humans interact with the computers. Uh, yeah. Okay, fine. And as a disclaimer, so we have used a lot of case studies, case studies for the products what we are going to be looking at as a good example and as a bad example. But ultimately, please keep in mind that these products are not endorsed by us. It's just for the sake of case study that we understand the concepts better. Going on to the next slide. Okay, before I actually start the presentation, let me tell you I'm a very big fan of human interaction, right? Even though this entire workshop is about human computer interaction, I am a very big fan of human interaction. And I generally like to have a connect with the audience rather than just communicate. So I would want to have interaction with you as and when possible. That can be in the form of me asking questions, and you probably can unmute and answer. As much as possible, let's avoid the chat. Probably you can just unmute and let's have an interaction. It's more of the human interaction. We'll be discussing all those concepts in this session as well, right? There's something about this world today that machines and computers are becoming more human, right? And we humans are becoming more computers. We are becoming more mechanic in our approach, right? So that's the whole point. So I'll be asking you a lot of questions for better engagement, and so please feel free to unmute yourself, and let's get started, right? So again, before starting, Sivaselvan sir told me that there are a lot of people from various different backgrounds, a lot of diverse backgrounds. So I just wanted to understand the audience set a little better. So I would request if some of you could unmute and probably tell what organization or what domain are you coming from. So this would help also the audience set to know each other better.
Yeah, good afternoon, sir. Ishan, sir.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Yeah, I'm architect Samir Rahman. I'm basically I'm working as associate professor in KL University. My background is architecture. I did my master's in interior design as well. So design thinking and the user interface and all these are the topics which have been always interested.
That's great, sir. Thank you so much, sir. So you're from architecture. Anyone else?
Hi, Ishan. This is Shilpa here. I
Hello,
am a design thinker from National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad. And
That's great.
I have about 14 years of industry experience. And currently, I am dealing with two companies where we are doing some design thinking activity for an AI and AR platform. So the reason I enrolled for this workshop, I thought it will be like a good interaction. So I was just waiting for the topic you just picked up. So I'm looking forward to it.
That is so nice, Shilpa ma'am. Really glad to have experts like you.
You're the expert. We are here to learn.
Sure. Anita ma'am?
Yes. Hello, this is Anita, and I'm from teaching line, and basically I'm with the Department of New Media Technologies. So we have students and interns who are working on this product, app designing, interface designing. So that is the reason I have joined this class, to have guidance from you, to interact with my students and guide them also related to this interface design, interaction designs.
That is fantastic, ma'am.
Thank
Thank you, ma'am. Anyone else? Some domain very different from what we have seen so far? Anyone else? Because see, I have the participant's name, so I'm very used to calling out the participant's name just for the sake of interaction. So please, please tolerate me on that. Anybody else would like to share your background, or I'll get started. Right? Okay. Fine. So the reason why I was asking you what are the different or the various backgrounds you are coming from is I wanted to understand is there something that is common in all the backgrounds what we are probably looking at. Is there one single concept that applies to all the backgrounds universally?
Yeah, user interface is a common aspect for all products.
Okay, fine. Thank you, sir. So we got one answer. User experience. Then the second is collaborative exercise. Okay, fine. Anyone else? Okay, fine. So user experience is actually a very right answer, but let's go before user experience, right? So the one common thing what actually applies universally to all the domains is the concept of problem solving, right? And yes, ma'am, Shubhangi, ma'am, that's actually right. Because only when you're going to have the problem solving capability, you're ultimately going to develop an empathy towards users, right? So whatever domain you're coming from doesn't matter, but one thing what's common is the concept of problem solving. That's the first and foremost principle to begin with, right? And this is the entire foundation for the concept of design thinking to kick in, right? So my second question, again, very simple. What are some of the products or apps that you like using and why? It can be any app, it can be an app, it can be a product, it can be anything.
So for me, it is Amazon because it's so user friendly, and even the delivery as well as customer satisfaction, all aspects are, to my understanding, it's 5-star, I can say.
That is great. That is great. So I'm getting a lot of other answers as well. Swiggy, Big Basket, Zomato, anything else? Please feel free to unmute and tell also, because I generally promote a more natural language interaction rather than the text-based interaction.
Yeah, hi, Ishan. So, looking at the two big giants, Amazon and Flipkart, which I think all of us use on a daily basis, I find the Amazon filters and interface much more workable than Flipkart.
Okay.
Though I would love to purchase from Flipkart since it's an Indian brand, but due to the extremely poor generated filters and a very like a very dysfunctional interface, I think most of us end up using Amazon more. So I think interface is one very big problem I generally face with Flipkart.
Thank you so much, Shilpa. I think you're absolutely right. So the fact is that whatever good products or whatever products that you all have mentioned regarding your liking, the one thing that is common is user experience, right? Like Shilpa ma'am just said, the filters are not good, the interface is bad, or the interface is clumsy. All those things ultimately adds is to your user experience, how the user feels, or what are the emotions in the user after using the product, right? So the common thing here that comes out is user experience, right? So we have seen two concepts even before getting started with the presentation, that is problem solving, and second is user experience, right? So let's get started with the thing. So I have two amazing quotes to begin with. So let's do the first one. No matter how good the product functionality is, it is the design, what we also call as the interaction design, that makes the first and foremost impact. So it is the closest to the mind of an user. So the example is the Google search engine, right? Because technically, if you see the Google search engine, it's a very complicated algorithm that is working in the black box, that is working even without you knowing it. But for a user, when he is using the Google search engine, he is not aware, or he doesn't know how good the functionality is or how complex the functionality is. But everything is very simplified for the user, whether it be the clean UI or whether it be the efficient and relevant search results. So that is what ultimately impacts the user. You might have great functionality, right? But if you do not have a good design that ultimately interacts with the end user, your product might be a failure, right? So that is the entire essence of this first quote. Now let's go to the second quote. Right, the second quote is again an extension of the first one, which says that success of a complex and advanced technology depends on how easily the user adopts it and uses it. Right, so we all know Amazon Alexa. Right, Amazon Alexa actually enables us to talk and give commands the way how we actually interact with our fellow human beings. Right, so this is something that was probably not possible say 10 years back. Exactly, voice interaction. So there's a technical term in machine learning that's called NLP, natural language processing. Right, it basically allows the humans to interact with machines the way how human interaction works. Right, so this is the second quote. Now let's get started with a case study. I hope you can see the screen. So talking about my personal experience, I had always seen my dad especially, do the online banking, and online banking from the, say for example HDFC or SBI sort of a website, and this is how the website actually looked, right? And even as I grew up, there was one sense of urgency when I actually saw the website like this. There can be many reasons. The reason is probably number one, there are a lot too many information flashed at you, lot of data, lot of constraints, lot of warning sort of a thing, which actually makes you little apprehensive, for using the online banking system. And I'm sure this is not just my case, but many people out there must have faced this situation where online banking would have been a very big thing at that point of time. Say probably 5 years back, it was a big deal, right? Yes, it was not welcoming. So what are the possible reasons? Like I mentioned here, there was a sense of urgency and nervousness only by looking at the website. When you log into the online banking website, everything looked too technical, right? So for a normal user to have a first glance at it, it introduced a sense of urgency.
Can I say something?
Yeah, please, sure.
So it's a very good thing that you brought up, because even now, though we are so tech savvy and surviving on digital technology, using an app is so much easier. But when you have to go on the website for net banking, it is a pain. Firstly,
Totally.
They will not connect you immediately. 2-3 pages you keep pressing login. After so much of useless, unnecessary information, after a great effort, you actually reach the actual login. And then
Exactly.
even after getting into that, the user interface is so crazy and so complicated that I think it's so much more easy to use the app, because I don't know for what reason they have not been able to simplify the online banking interface. It is very, very chaotic.
Exactly, Shilpa ma'am. That's the entire point I'm trying to convey, right? So just imagine a scenario back then when we did not have the app. Online banking was actually a big deal, right? We used to think 10 times before actually making an online transaction.
Security
Correct?
concern and password
Correct.
issue and so many other things.
Correct. So now we look at the online banking made easy, right? For example, in this particular case, I have used Google Pay, but it doesn't mean that I endorse Google Pay. So you see, with the user-friendly app, with the user-friendly interaction, the online banking has been made so easy that even a school kid can do an online payment very quickly, right? There is a flip side of it. The flip side obviously is that we end up spending a lot more because of the convenience of online banking, but that's a different topic altogether. So what are the factors that made the online banking very easy, right? The number one thing is quick and easy. It is very easy to send and receive money now. We do not have to make any complicated web login or sort of a thing. Everything is simplified in terms of buttons. The number of options which is given to the user is very less, very relevant. There is no irrelevant information which is adding to your anxiety, right? So everything is very clean and neat.
Second, the touch points have reduced.
Exactly. You don't want to unnecessarily introduce 100 different options to the user, out of which only 2 are relevant to make a online payment, right? So there's a lot of design thinking that goes into it. So we'll come to that. But right now, let's stick to the online payment apps user interface, right? So if you see, there's a friendly user interface. Obviously, it is secure, and not just So what these apps have done, they have introduced these additional facilities also, right? Paying your utility bills to recharge your mobile so that it can attract more and more users, right? And there are multiple paying options. So this is, I think, one of the most important features of the app, that it doesn't constrain you to use one particular option of payment, right? So even though from a user point, what he might see is the app is beautiful, the app is visually stunning, but there's a lot of design thinking has gone into making the app. And this session will not deal with the visually stunning or the visual designs of the app or the product. It will deal with how did we approach from the problem statement to the app, and that entire process is called design thinking, right? Let's look at the second. The second example is online investment made easy. Now, this is again a very similar example. There are various companies, you can say startups, that have actually capitalized on the, you can say, as mentioned by Shilpa ma'am, the crazy and the, the very non-attracting design and functionality of the banking websites. So they have cashed in on that as an opportunity to develop their company. So these companies, I'm sure you must have seen companies like Zerodha, Upstocks, Grow, right? So these companies actually try to make the online investment very easy, because 10 years back, the financial literacy of Indians was very poor, because not only, as per the statistics, only 2 to 3% of Indians used to invest 10 years back. And now that figure has actually jumped to close to 10 to 12%. And the reason is,
Yes.
earlier, the entire process of investing was very tedious, and it was something that only experts, used to do. But now, if you see, for example, if let's look at the UI for this is the Grow app. Okay, so now it's very quick and easy to explore, analyze, and invest in stocks, because they're not just giving you the options of investing; they're also giving you the analysis of stocks, which stock has done better in how many years, in how many days, in how many months, and so and so. So overall, it becomes a one place solution for somebody who's looking to invest, because he's getting all the relevant information with respect to online investment in the app itself, right? Otherwise, you have to go and do the search and exploration all by yourself if you were to use a online banking website, right? So it is safe and secure. There is one-click order payment, and the KYC process is extremely easy. So all these things actually adds to the user experience, right? So I hope I made the examples pretty clear.
Yeah, and
Now
also
there's
I think a major driver in everyone getting onto Zerodha and Upstock is that basically the middleman has been cut out. Those investment brokers who do the broking for you. So that whole interface has been wiped out, and you can just invest at your own comfort and your own budget. And it provides enough information for you to learn and start investing. I mean, someone like me, who was miles and miles away from anything to do with finance, actually started trading on Zerodha last year in the pandemic.
That's actually a great
And
example. Correct.
yeah, so it was very simple actually, to integrate on that and learn with the little information that was available, and then
Right.
learn the analysis. I mean, coming from design and creative, this was like a totally new ballgame altogether. But since the interface and the whole process was made so simple, I think during the pandemic, only half the country has logged on to Zerodha and started doing something different.
Correct. That's the exact point I'm trying to say. Like you mentioned, the intermediate people were eliminated, right? So the entire point of this session is we'll be looking at few examples of apps and products, but will not be talking about, or will not be focusing about how beautiful it is or how easy it is to use, but we'll be thinking from a problem solving point of view, where they have made it convenient for the user from the functional design point of view, right? Not just from the visual design point of view. So we'll be talking about design thinking in terms of functionality and what problem were they trying to solve. Now I have a short activity for you. You don't have to give me the answer, right? Just take this problem, note it down, and probably if we have time at the end of the session, we can discuss more on this, right? So the problem is you have to design an elevator keeping in mind the COVID-19 situation. It's a very simple problem, right? And I don't want you to people to give me the solution right now. We'll definitely discuss this once the session is completed, right? So let's go to the next slide. So now we come to design thinking and HCI. Now, why design thinking? So like I told you, irrespective of domain, whether it is a finance domain, whether it's a marketing domain, manufacturing domain, engineering domain, one thing that is the most crucial aspect is the design thinking process. So design thinking is the first and foremost important step for any design, whether it is HCI design or product design. And the most important skill which I tell people, and even I have heard from my professors, is not to come up with the right answers, but to come up with a lot of right and relevant questions. Because the right questions actually lead you to formulate a very precise and exact problem statement, which in turn will lead you to the right answer, right solution. Because if your problem statement is not correct or is inappropriate, you are never going to lead to a right solution. So the questions or the explorations which you're supposed to ask, they help in two aspects. Number one, they help you in understanding the problem from a user's lens. That how does the user see this problem? Like I told you, we might be expert in design, or we might be expert in, say, some domain like HCI or something. But how does a user who has no experience, no background, how are you going to sell the product to him, or how are you going to solve his problem? So right, so for that we have to understand the problem from a user's lens. The second aspect is fine tune the problem to get the exact problem statement. Because what happens mostly when the user comes up with a problem, that problem can be very vague, and that problem may not be good enough to actually solve the problem. So you need to do a lot of market research, a lot of user research to understand the situation of the user and fine tune the problem, right? So design thinking has a huge impact on how the end users are finally going to interact with the system to solve their problem and determine the experience what they had while using the system, right? So design thinking is a very non-linear process, in fact a very iterative process, which helps us to understand the user, number one, challenge the assumptions, right? Because as a product designer, you cannot assume. If you assume, then you end up making the product. There's a lot of resources, a lot of time which goes into developing the solution. So if you have assumed something and if you have made the product, but when the assumption goes wrong, you have to start from scratch. You have to start from the step zero, that is defining the problem. Correct. That is unbiased and open approach. So you need to understand the user, challenge all the assumptions which are out there, and start off with a problem, go ahead, probably refine the problem, again come back. So it's a non-iterative process which helps you to redefine the problem, right? This redefining of problem is something which is very, very crucial to design thinking. Exactly. You need to diverge first, lot of diversion, to understand whatever assumptions out there, to understand whatever requirements are out there, and finally come to a problem statement. So generally what we do as users or as students or as any other professional, we look at a problem, and the first thing what we try to do is, what do we do first the moment we see a problem? Anyone? Okay, the first thing what we do when we actually come look at a problem is exactly try to find a solution. So that is something that we have to stop, or probably we have to improve that aspect if we are highly engaged in a design activity. That design can be product design or HCI, right? So the first step is, when you look at a problem, try to refine the problem, right? And to refine the problem, you need to understand the user, you need to understand the market, you need to challenge the assumptions, and then create innovative solutions to prototype. Your prototype can fail, so you might have to come back to again the problem's definition stage, and you might have to refine the problem again. So this is the entire process of design thinking, where the first step is you have to empathize with the user, that what the user requirement is, or what is the problem that is faced by the user. Then you try to define a problem, you ideate, you prototype. If your prototype fails or it does not meet the user requirement, you come back again to stage 2, or probably you have to come back again to stage 1, and then redefine your problem, right? So this is the entire process of design thinking in a nutshell. Now, why design thinking is so important? So all the products that we discussed now, the key thing that stood out for us was the user experience, right? Exactly. So we have to put ourselves into the shoes of the user. Only then we can actually define the right problem. Because defining a problem is not a challenge, but defining a right problem is the first and foremost challenge. So in user experience design, it's crucial to develop and refine the skills. These skills are used to understand and address the rapid change in the user environment and behaviors. Now, why am I saying rapid changes? Because if you make a product keeping in mind how the user interacted and behaved back in 2000s, and if I try to make the same product now, it will fail. That is because how the user interacts, right? How the user interacts with other humans, how the user interacts with the system has changed a lot over this 5-10 years, right? So the behavior of the user is continuously changing year by year basis, and that is why the user research and the market research has to be also a continuous evolving process. Otherwise, you might end up making a product which is outdated, right? So the second point is the design teams use design thinking to tackle the unknown problems because they can reframe this in a human-centric way and focus what's important for the user, right? The third process is thinking outside the box. There are times where you have to think outside the box to come up with a solution which is not very obvious. But before you come up with a solution which is not very obvious, you have to come up with a problem which is also not very obvious. So that takes me to my 5 stages of design that we have discussed earlier. So you see, this is not a linear process. This is a non-linear process where you might have to go to stage 1, go to stage 2, go to stage 3. From stage 3, you might have to come back because the prototype was not working properly. So this is a very non-linear process. So the 5 stages, let me quickly summarize what are these things. Empathize is basically you need to know your user. You need to do a lot of research for your user's need. And like I told you here, the culture, the background, how the user interacts in a society, all these things comes into play. The second process is the defining phase, where you need to understand the user's need and define a problem, right? Initially, in the first iteration, you might define a problem which is not very precise or which is probably very abstract. You go on developing a prototype. Again, because the problem was abstract, your prototype solution was abstract. Then you might again come back, ideate, come up with a more detailed problem statement. The more detailed problem statement will actually lead to a more detailed problem statement. More detailed solution. So this is how you're going to iterate and finally come to a solution. So the entire process from problem statement to solution is a very challenging process, and how the solution is going to finally shape up, that will also impact how the user is interacting with the solution. That solution can be a mobile app, that solution can be any tangible quantity. The third idea is ideate. That is, we have to challenge the assumptions and create ideas, like I told you before. The fourth point is the prototype. Now, for a given problem statement, what we finalize, we need to create a solution for that using a prototype. Then we have to come to a testing phase. Now, one of the most important aspect of this entire design phase is you come up with a problem, you come up with a prototype solution, and then you come up with a metric. That metric is called assessment metric, right? So you need to define your assessment metric properly in order to understand that whether the prototype solution that you have developed, is it good enough to solve the user problem or not? So if you are not defining this metric properly, you might end up not evaluating your product appropriately, which would lead to an inappropriate solution altogether, right? So these are the 5 stages of design. So if we look at HCI as a broad domain, it's a very interdisciplinary field, because if you look at from the academic disciplines, it has principles of ergonomics, psychology, cognitive science, design, information engineering, computer science. Then there's also this aspect of human factors, right? Cognitive engineering, how the human is interacting with the computer, the cognitive ergonomics. And then there are the design practices. The design practices are mostly inclined towards visual design, which leads to the graphic design, product design, aesthetics, right? So HCI is a very broad term, and there's a lot of concepts which are included in HCI. Now let's go to another slide. So as a problem solver, there are some basic questions that you have to answer, or that has to be addressed in the system. So the first and foremost question is, are computers intuitive and complicated, right? Because unless you as a designer can answer these questions, you cannot end up making a simplified or an apt solution. I hope I'm clear. So you as a designer have to answer these questions. So are computers intuitive or complicated? Second, is computer frustrating or rewarding? How can computers be made available to everybody, like different languages, backgrounds, physical abilities, etc.? To what level can computer interaction be standardized? Are computers user friendly, and what is the meaning of user friendly? So once you understand all these questions as a product developer, it becomes very easy for you to develop solutions. So coming back to design thinking, so it is very important to understand humans and the human behavior. Ethnographic research is the key. So ethnography, for people who are not aware of what it is, ethnographic research is a study that goes into how the user is interacting in a society. What does he eat? What does he talk? How is he interacting with his fellow human beings? What sort of technologies is he using? It is basically to understand the cultural background of a user. To give you a very fair example, a user in United States has a very different ethnic background from a user in India. So if a product or if a solution actually worked for that particular user in America, it is not necessary that the same product will be applicable or the same product is used or will be a successful model in India. To give you a short example, let's take the example of Nano. A very, very simple example, right? Now, Nano was introduced in India sometimes in 2000s, right? It was a failed model. The product was a failure. Can somebody tell me why was the product a failure? Because there was a lot of example of cars like Nano, based on electric and very, very cheap and affordable cars in Europe and in US, right? So Tata tried to replicate the same thing in India. But what was the problem with Nano in India? The main problem, let's not get into the technical problems, but the problem at the conceptual level. Anyone?
The communication and branding was all wrong. Instead of, I mean, they just
Okay, what do you mean by
highlighted
that?
the wrong aspect, I think. Instead
Hello?
of switching people from two-wheelers to four-wheelers, they basically branded it as the cheapest car in India. So somewhere psychologically, I think it didn't
Right.
go down very well with people. So they didn't want to be categorized into having the
Exactly,
cheapest car in
Shilpa.
India.
That's great. So that's the entire point, right? In very
Yes.
conscious.
Yeah, so
Yes. In
psychologically they went wrong.
Yes, in USA, people are not very conscious about the social status, right? But in India, there is something that the society and the environment of Indian audience is something that car, house is a sort of status symbol for us, right? The entire reason why people end up buying car or purchasing car is to have a sort of social status or social standing in the society. So when you brand something as the cheapest vehicle, it actually, that branding of the car actually gets associated with your personal branding as well. And that is where the entire ethnographic study of Nano went wrong, right? So the point is, no matter how good the product is or what problems it is trying to solve, if you do not understand the context, the background of the user, the product is going to fail, right? So this is the aspect of design thinking that I try to highlight through this example. Now, let's look at design principles. So Don Norman is a very famous author, and there's a famous book written by him, and I'll tell you the book name. You all probably should have a look at it. So there are some really good principles of design that he's highlighted in his work, and these principles will be useful for people from various backgrounds, various domains. So it is not confined to HCI, right? So this is the book. Okay, the book name is Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman. It's one of the most influential books in product design. It explains the idea behind design of very simple everyday objects that we use even without we not being aware of it. Because sometimes we take the design of a product for granted, correct? We expect things to be the same always. But it takes us just one bad design encounter to actually realize the importance of design in everyday things, correct? It's only that one bad experience with a person you want, and then you realize, you start respecting or appreciating the good people around you. It's the same with the products as well, right? So okay, I think probably some of you have read the book. That's what I understand from the chat. Can somebody tell me what's wrong with this? Is there something abnormal about the entire book first page, the cover page?
Handle, teapot.
Very nice, sir. So exactly. So the handle. So you do not expect the handle to be on the side from where you actually pour the milk, all right, or the tea.
Affordance, I believe affordance is the right word.
Affordance is the right word. So now, exactly. So now we'll be looking at few design principles which Don Norman has suggested in his book, and that helps us to understand the product at a conceptual and design level. So yeah, so Don Norman's design principles is actually broken down into two broad steps. Okay, the first step is Don Norman's 7 important questions of user interaction, right? Where, like I told you, the first step when you encounter a problem statement, it is not to jump onto a solution, but rather ask questions to understand the user and the goal of developing the product. So Don Norman has formulated 7 question sort of a framework that we'll be looking at. For the second step, you see Don Norman's 7 fundamental design principles. Now, to answer the 7 questions, what we actually came up with in the first step, we need few design principles to answer those questions. So that is actually based on Don Norman's design principles. So let's look at the 7 important questions, the step 1 of Don Norman. Okay. Now what he says is design exists in everyday things we use, such as cups, switches, door handles, and it can be electron or say websites, applications, the HCA aspects of that. Design, what he says, Don Norman, is really an act of communication. You need to communicate your product. You need to communicate your functionality. You need to communicate how it can help you to achieve your goal. And for that, you should have a deeper understanding of the person who is ultimately going to be using the product, right? So Norman describes the conceptual framework. The framework is called action cycle, which interprets the user in 3 different components. Okay, so there's a framework. We'll learn a little bit about the framework quickly. So the first aspect of the framework is called the gulf of execution and evaluation. Okay, then there is the 7 stages of action and the 3 levels of processing. So the gulf of execution and evaluation mainly deals with when you try to prototype or when you try to test your model, you execute and then you have to evaluate. And like I told you before, it is the designer's responsibility to define the problem. Number 1. Second, to define the metric. Metric, I mean assessment metric. So when the designer is making some sort of an intermediate, or you can say a prototype, how good the prototype is, there has to be a metric, right? So that metric definition is also the responsibility of the designer himself. Correct. Let's look at each component in detail. The gulf of execution and evaluation. So this is how Don Norman actually formulated the gulf of execution and evaluation. It's basically a framework which consists of 2 important parts: execution, that is how are you going to do something. Okay, it's a first question that you have to ask. Okay, how are you going to do something? Then comes the evaluation. Evaluation part actually deals with figuring out what you have done. Correct. So what you have done, is it good enough or is it not? How do you define is it good or not? So for that you need an evaluation metric, right? And then the entire question is actually squeezed between the goal and the world. Okay, the goal here tells what the user wants to accomplish or what is the goal of using the product, right? And the world actually implies the physical world or everything we see around us. So the physical world offers some sort of constraints or something. So the entire goal of point of having the goal and world is the goal should be relevant in the world that is set up for the user. Like I told, for a USA person, the world is USA. In the Indian context of things, the world is India. It has different set of constraints, right? So now let's imagine a scenario where we have parked our car and we need to pay for our parking space. Okay, let's consider this as an example. So the first part of this activity will require a sequence of steps in the gulf of execution, right? So from the goal to use the ticket machine to pay the parking space, okay, that is the goal. Now then we have to figure out the possible actions on the machine. So this is now the how part. how part of the question, or how is the user going to interact with the ticket machine to get the ticket, right? Figuring out the possible actions on the machine. The third part is select a sequence of actions such as entering coins and pressing a button. Fourth is physically execute the action sequence. So the second part of this activity involves interpreting the state of the world by undergoing the gulf of evaluation. Now comes the evaluation. So the first part actually said that you do some set of steps to develop the product, or you can say to ideate the product. The second part tells perceive what just happened. So whatever you did in the first 4 steps, was it good enough? You interpret the perception. Is it good enough for the user? Is it good enough to solve the problem which I began with? And then you need to evaluate your outcome. So if your outcome actually aligns closer to the goal, you end up going ahead with the prototyping. But if your outcome is very different from what is expected for the user, you again go back and change this set of 4 steps, right? So you understand the non-linear, the iterative process of defining the problem. So now the 7 important questions what Don Norman suggests is that the goal, what do I want to accomplish and why? Okay. The second is plan. How can I do it? There has to be some implementation idea in my mind regarding how should I achieve my goal. The third is specify. What options do I have? Okay. Fourth is what can I do now? Perceive is what just happened. Like I told you, once you do a set of actions, you need to understand whether the actions made sense or not. So perceive deals with that. Interpret, what does it mean? You conclude. You conclude, is this solution apt? Then compare. You compare it with the end goal and see if it really solves the problem. So this is how the entire gulf of action and execution framework is formulated by Don Norman. So this is a very you can say a very technical approach which is required to solve a very high and scalable problems. A problem which requires you to deal with not just 1 or 2 users, but with wide variety of users, right? This is where the giants like Flipkart, Google, Amazon comes into play, because they're not solving problems of just a specific a region or a state. They solve a problem on a massive, huge scale. So if you take this to the ticket example, the ticket machine example, this is how it actually corresponds. The goal is to use the ticket machine to pay for my parking space. The plan is how to understand how to operate the ticket machine. Specify, select the actions to enter the car registration number, insert the required amount of money, and print the ticket. Then you have perform. You have to physically execute a specified action sequence to get your ticket. Perceive, observe the digital display and the printed ticket. Then interpret, the car details and the money have been accepted. So that's the conclusion. And compare. Now the printed ticket has led me to my goal, which was the entire goal for the ticket example that I gave you. So this is how you come up with these 7 questions. Now coming to the processing aspect, because the user has to process once the user has interacted with the solution, correct? So there is a sense of emotion the user feels after he has used the product. So the levels of processing are described as visceral, behavioral, and reflective. So the first one says that subconscious reaction to aesthetics, right? Now this is where you say the app is clean, the app is good, or you can say the app is fast or slow. So this is how you are going to react. In the behavioral aspect, it basically says how usable the app was. Was it very useful to solve your problem in first place? Because many times the app does not function only well. So the first aspect deals with the aesthetics. The second aspect deals with the usability of the product. And then there is reflective, which says what was your final conclusion after using the product. So the 3 level of processing can be associated with the 7 stages of action that we saw earlier. If you see, the plan and compare is actually associated with the reflective emotion or reflective processing. Okay, which says is your plan, or is whatever you compare the results, is it good enough? So that is where the conclusion aspect of reflective comes into play, right? Then for the specify and interpret, you have to understand what all actions that you have to do to make something usable, and that is how it is actually associated with behavioral, right? And the last is the visceral part, which deals with how you are reacting, or how you are reacting to the aesthetics, right? So that is where the performance and the perceived part comes. So this is the entire thing, how Don Norman formulates the 7 questions that you have to ask before going on to the design phase of the product. Now let's look at the 7 fundamental design principles that Don Norman suggests to understand how good the design is, or how can we better design the product. So there are 7 key principles. We call it discoverability, feedback, conceptual model, affordance, signifier, mapping, and constraints, right? So discoverability makes it easier to understand, where to perform actions. You have to perform actions which are, or you have to provide options to the user to be able to perform actions which is right in front of him. You can't give an option that he cannot easily discover, right? Let's look at each one of them in detail. So coming to the first one, we have to discover the features that the product has to offer. So whenever we engage with an everyday thing like a TV remote control or a website, we figure out what to perform and how to perform. So you see the remote over here, right? You do not need a user manual to actually go ahead and start using the mouse. That is because everything is done in a way that it's easily discoverable, right? You have clear focal points that calls to action, images, and headers. So that is how you are clearly using symbols, right? Symbols, images, right? You do not need a explanation for that. Exactly, self-explanatory. So that is the entire aspect of discoverability. Then we look at the second aspect, that is feedback. Now the concept of feedback basically says when the user is interacting with an app or a product, it does some action. Now whether the action was a successful action, or whether it was a failure, or whether that action has an impact, right? And that that impact actually leads to another action. So there has to be some sort of communication back from the system in order to inform the user that so and so was the result of your action. So that is what we mean by feedback. So here we look at an example where we try to log in. Okay, we have 2 pictures, one on the right, one on the left. So if you look at the left one, we try to log in and say one of the username or the password was not correct and the login failed. So here the feedback is from the system that the login has failed, right? But on top of that, it has actually told why the login has failed. It is because the password or the username did not match. If you look at the second aspect, that is also a good example of a feedback, because actually it is telling you the login has failed, but it is not telling you why the login has failed. Correct? So there are 2 aspects. One, you give the feedback, and second, you give a relevant feedback, or a feedback which is informative. Exactly. So that is what is required. You give a feedback not just for the sake of giving feedback. You give a feedback which can help the user rectify the mistake, or if there is a mistake. Then we look at the conceptual model. Now the entire concept behind conceptual model is to tell the user how a thing works, right? So I'm sure you people must have, say for example, installed apps like Zomato, Ola, Uber, right? So what is the first step that happens after you register yourself? You have given all your information, you have given your name, you have given your email ID. What is the first process after that? It gives you a ride over how to use the app. Accept items, terms, exactly, that's there. But I'm asking, once everything is done, all the formalities are done, then the first step is it gives you a guide of how to use the app. It tells you what are all the features, how can you achieve them, and what is the step-by-step process of using the app. Exactly, that is the app tour or the manual process. So this is the entire concept of conceptual model, right? And this entire, it's basically called the onboarding process, right? It's the onboarding process of the app or the product. The onboarding process has to be relevant and meaningful. I think sir in the first session described the use of this user manual, right? Written in very tiny fonts, in a lot of languages probably, which is not even relevant to your your country or your region. That is also conceptual model, but that does not solve the purpose of conceptual model, right? So you need to have an onboarding process which makes sense or which is easy to understand, right? Let's look at affordance. I think somebody already had given a hint about affordance. So affordance basically tells you, you look at a product, you look at a feature, and you should know what you should be able to do with it, right? So whenever we look at a chair, we do not need any onboarding process to tell us, okay, go to the chair, sit down, because we know what to do. So this is what the affordance concept does, right? A button, you can easily tell it is supposed to be put up, pulled up, pulled down, flip. The knob has to be rotated. So this is the concept of affordance. So then we look at the signifier. Now signifier, what it does, it's a feature that the product offers, and you should know what it does or what the functionality is. So signifier provides a clarity on where to perform an action, correct? In simple terms, if you look at this image, what do you think this image, or what do you think this functionality does?
It's related to power on off.
Correct. It's related to power on off, right? So the good aspect is, whenever you see this feature, whether it's a washing machine, whether it's a computer, whether it's an app, you know, irrespective of what the product is, whenever you see this feature, you know it has to do something with on or off, power on and off. Correct? So this is what the signifier is. It signifies that what is the functional use of that particular feature. Now we come to the mapping. Mapping is again a very simple concept, which says that if a user is doing something, how does it get mapped to the action of that, or how does it get mapped to the result of that action, right? To give the example I have used over here, you have the brightness, right? Brightness in the mobile. So when you move the bar towards the right, the brightness increases. When you move the bar towards the left, the brightness reduces. So this is the mapping that the user has in the mind, that whenever you move it towards the right or you move it, the position of the cursor or that button on the bar actually relates to the brightness functionality in general, right? So these are the examples of mental model. If you end up having something else, it might actually violate the mental model, and that might lead to a lesser adoption of your product. Exactly, visual retention for function. Now we look at constraint. Constraint is again a very simple concept. So what happens when a user is presented a product, he can literally do anything with the product, right? Most of the times there is so much information overload on the user that the user does not even know what to do, what not to do. Sometimes it is important for a user to understand what not to do along with what to do, right? So the constraints actually help the user to use the product in the intended fashion it was designed for, right? You don't want to be using chair for something it was not designed for. So that is where the entire idea of constraint comes in. So if you look at this example that I've used over here, because of those rods, those 3 rods, it lets you know that the road is not actually designed for 4-wheelers. Correct? It is only designed for 2-wheelers. So the introduction of constraints can help you understand and communicate the use of the design better, use of the product better.
Ishan, can I ask one question, if you may allow?
Sure, Saurav. Please go ahead.
I just wanted to understand what is the difference between the previous slide, the mental mapping and signifier, because both are arbitrary in nature.
Okay, so signifier and mapping is actually interrelated concepts. The reason is, mapping actually tells you that if you are doing something, you can have a corresponding result, right? How do you map it to the result? correct? It's basically a mental model. Mental model, like I told you in this particular case, if you know the bar is going towards the right, the brightness is going to increase, right? So you are moving the bar towards the right. That is your action. What is the result? The result is the brightness is getting increased. So what I mean by
That is
mapping?
feedback.
Sorry,
That is feedback which I am getting.
that is not
Sir.
exactly the feedback. See, because
Sir, Ishan sir, I mean, if you permit, can I add something to the
sure,
sir's
sure,
point? See,
please.
in the morning session, sir has said mapping is about the expectation of user from the software. For example,
Okay,
what we are expecting, it is like imagining outcome.
correct.
It is like what we believe from the software or app,
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Can I say
Yeah.
It
something?
is,
Could,
yeah,
could you
it
come
is.
again, sir? I didn't get you exactly.
See, mapping is like it's a what you expect from the software. I mean,
No, no.
it is an
Can I say
imaginative
something?
connection.
Maybe it is going a little out of scope of the Don Norman's design principles.
Yeah.
Sure, Shilpa, I'm sure you want to
Yeah.
say something.
Yeah, mapping is more like a visual mental map where you automatically kind of connect the dots between different functions. Like mentally, subconsciously, you know that if I do this, this will happen. If I do this, this will happen. It visually helps you to contain information and connect it between each other.
Yeah, and
In that case, I understand that signifier is much deeper concept. But again, when we are talking in right now in the context we are talking right in SCI, it is also visually we are having making relationship. For example, the power button, it does not have any kind of relation of its power itself. It is what we have learned for a period of.
Yeah, so basically
Saurav sir.
conditional learning that that same icon is used on every device to switch it on and off. So over the time now by default we know that if we press it, it will go on or off. Like even
So,
like a Bluetooth symbol, wherever you see a Bluetooth symbol, you are immediately able to understand the function. But yeah,
okay,
basically a conditional learning.
Saurav sir, to give you a better example, if you can see my screen, right, it's basically a PDF, right? Right?
Yes,
So you see this red cross on right top, correct? What do you think it will do? What do you think is the functionality of the red cross?
will close this.
We'll close the window.
Exactly. Now you do not need a manual. You do not need any guideline to tell you that only if you go and press that it closes, because that's the mental model that we have created. Correct. Similarly, if you see this Windows logo on the left bottom, you know what it does. So what Windows will do when it comes with its next version, it will still be consistent because a mental model has been created since decades in our mind. And when you violate the mental model, it actually leads to confusion. I think that's also the reason what sir was giving example with the Windows operating system. You had to go somewhere on the top right to actually find how to switch off the system, right? It was not very intuitive. That was violating the mental model. So the mapping here actually tells you that if you do something, you actually relate to some outcome of what you're doing. But
But
signify
on the same thing, this cross is signifying that it will it will close that window, or that window logo you have showed. It signifies that it is a Windows, a symbol of window which will open up with certain kind of option into it. I think these are also symbols where we.
signifier is all about symbols only, correct? Signifier is all about communicating through symbols.
Sir, signifiers are what I understood is already our experienced. See, what our experience plays a part. For example, that switch symbol is there. That
Correct.
experience, our previous experience is coming into play. That is established one. But
Exactly.
mental mapping is something which is expected in future. That is unconsciously we are expecting something. So it in some way it is experience based, but still it's not very precisely like we are not very clear like what is our mental mapping exactly is. I mean, these symbols are already experienced, but what is mental mapping is like we haven't seen that, but still we expect something from the software or device.
I think probably that's a one way of looking at it. Like you said, signifier is something that we have a mental model created in our mind. We would not expect this power button, or you can say, let's not call it a power button. We would not expect this symbol to do anything other than power button, or you can say switching on and off. If a product is doing something else, then there is something wrong with the product, or it might not lead to an acceptance among the users. As far mapping is concerned, that is something you can every product can define it themselves. There is no hard and fast rule that the mapping has to be so and so. But again, a mental model plays a role there also, that a product which has been used for a long time and there's a norm. It's an unsaid norm basically, right?
It's like a individual's point of view perception of their interaction in that particular zone.
Yeah.
So mentally you are creating a geography of things which helps you connect or use the function as and when you want to.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yes. For example, signifiers, it is conscious brain that is happening. Whereas the mapping, it is unconscious kind of thing. We are not having an exact kind of established symbols there, but still it is unconscious kind of expectation that we tend to find from the softwares or whatever the products. That is what I understood.
That's again a one way of looking at it, sir, but I think that's fine. I think we have another nice example by Vani being given here. Scroll being used to zoom in or zoom out.
There's another example, I think, which can make it simple.
So sure, ma'am.
When Android users switch to an Apple, or when the Apple users try to use an Android device, whenever you use any Android device, whether it's a Samsung phone or a Vivo or any other brand, so kind of subconsciously know the functions and the way the process will happen in the phone. When you click that, those kind of options will come. So you're conditionally mapped to that kind of interaction with an Android device. But when you try to operate an Apple, the whole interface is different. So there you will start with, you don't have a mental map for that. So you will take time to get familiar with the functions or the interface of another device. And once you start using that, then your mental map will get created subconsciously. You will know how to use an Android device, or an Apple device. So
I think that's a good example. Correct. Because you see, whether it is an Android or I think that's a very good example, Shilpa ma'am.
Familiarity of your comfort zone.
Correct. So to conclude or summarize in a nutshell, what using the example what Shilpa ma'am has given, which is actually a very good example. Whether you are using an Android or an Apple, your actions or the functionality will be same, correct? But how things are getting executed or how things are getting mapped, it will be a little different, right? Even though the functionality is same, even though the goal is same, but how things are implemented will be very different when you're going from a Android interface to an Apple interface, correct? And that is where the mapping actually comes into play. So mapping is more, it can actually vary from product to product. But when we talk about signifiers has a lot to do with, your feature is trying to communicate that what it is doing, even without, you taking a conscious knowledge about, about its functionality from a user manual. So that is what the signifier does.
Yeah, it could be a specific set of activities that's predefined and done. Mapping is like maybe an action depending on what you're doing, and depending on the application, it works out.
Correct.
Is it?
It depends. To put it forth like this, mapping can vary, or mapping is actually depending on the application. It can vary from application to application.
Yes.
But when we talk about signifier, like I told, the cross button over here, if you see, wherever you go, you would expect the cross button to behave same. If a cross button is trying to open your your PDF, and if it's doing a function other than closing the file, then there is something wrong with the signifier, right? So signifier means that feature is trying to signify something, even without you having to be an expert in using that product. So that is what the signifier does.
It's an identification mark. So that you can identify.
Correct. See, signifier is all about symbols. In place of this cross, I could have just written close. I could have written minimize in place of this particular horizontal bar. But I don't want to do that. I want to keep things simple and easy to remember. easy to remember and easy to understand and comprehend. So that is why that is what the purpose of signifier is, to signify or to communicate its functionality. That is very different from mapping. We'll come back to this more if we have time at the end. Is this fine?
Sure,
Good.
sir. Thank you.
I'm actually very surprised and very glad with the kind of interactions we are having, because most of the workshops that I have taken, in the different domains, of course, not in HCI, lead to a very one-way interaction where I'm just talking and I'm not even confident that whether people are listening to me or not, right? Whether they are awake or not. So really good interaction, and let's take this forward. So I have a simple question. Now I'm actually throwing out a question to you. So you people are welcome to unmute and come up with the solution or come up with anything you want to say. So the problem is, e-commerce companies usually get a lot of customer calls and queries. Say one such query is, where is my order or shipment? Okay, it's a design problem. So please do not, whatever we're talking so far is from a design point of view. It has nothing to do, or you don't confine it to HCI. It's from a design point of view. So the problem is, where is my order or shipment? This is the query which is asked by the user. Okay. Now, how would you approach this problem as a product owner or a product designer? Okay, fine. I got one answer, including a tracking part. Okay. Anyone else? Probably you can just unmute and say, let's have a more human interaction.
Hello. Yeah, Isan. We can give put all the things information on a SAP, and the SAP detail will be shared with the client. He will track, he will get delivery, he will get the cost, he can get the invoice, it's like one-stop solution for him.
Okay, fine. So that is another thing. Anybody else? Any different GPS? Okay, fine.
Real-time tracking?
It can be a real-time tracking. Okay, fine. Anything else?
Actually, there are very few websites which actually have this step-by-step procedure of knowing and tracking your shipment. Okay. It shows you which warehouse it left, which city it has crossed, which city is it in right now, or if it is in transit or out for delivery. But that is there in very, very few applications. Most of them don't really show you your tracking status. So,
okay, that's fine. Understood. And I'll give you one thing. This is a pretty simple question. Now, why would I ask you such a simple question if the answer was so obvious? Or if this is not something that I was expecting. If I tell you this as a hint, could you alter your approach, or could you alter the answer that you're giving me?
Maybe this feature was not included in the design.
No. Let's assume, because it's a e-commerce company, so we would know where the shipment is. So we can always go back to them and tell them this is so and so is your order. It is in so and so city. We can always do that.
Correct.
Okay, fine. So let's make it a little more easier to understand. I said, how would you approach this simple problem?
I think first you would just make the caller, a little more comfortable and assuring. Then probably you can track the details and let them know. Because usually, I also do that, when the parcel is not there, I can't track where it is. So I just end up calling the customer care and asking, where is my parcel? It is not showing.
That's great. Fine. So this is what I think, this is the solution what I got more or less from all of you, right? Inform the user where the shipment is. That can be real-time tracking. That can be through GPS, or that can be anything. This is the solution what I got. Now the solution is actually correct. It's absolutely correct. But the reason that I asked you this question was, I wanted you to understand that when I told you in the beginning, whenever there's a problem, do not jump onto the solution. That is exactly what I was trying to test you guys here. Right? So, to understand how to approach this problem, I don't want the solution, because you can always come up with a solution. And like I told, how do you approach this problem as a product owner or a product designer? Maybe all that a user wants is his tracking information. Correct.
Correct, basically.
Correct. So from a user point of view, he only wants tracking ID and the tracking information. But you are a product designer. Correct. You are a product owner. So you try to refine the problem statement. The problem refinement can be happening through asking questions like, what are you really trying to solve? The exact problem in hand. And if you ask me, where is my order shipment, is a pretty vague problem statement for a product designer, right? So second point is you define a success metric around it to assess and evaluate your solution. Third is you ask yourself, does it actually answer the what really customer wants? Then you keep refining this. I think this is the same thing what we saw for the design thinking. Now how is it different? So the reason I gave you this case study was the approach is here is not to find a solution, but to rather fine tune the problem, because you are the product owner or a product designer over here. Shall we understand how it works? Okay, let's go ahead. I think I'm clear so far. So the solution is not to come up with a solution at all. The solution is to fine tune the problem and to understand what can be the real problem. So what I do, I break the problem into finer granularity to understand the exact nuances and get deeper details of the problem, right? So I'll ask a question: who are these people? Okay, I'll ask, are they first time users or have they ordered before? Have they called before? Where are they calling from? Are they getting the number from the e-commerce app, or is there any simple some other source? Okay, so these are the questions I'll try to ask. See, the immediate solution would obviously be to give the tracking information to the user. That's done. But as a design thinker or as a problem owner, your job doesn't just stop at giving the information.
Yeah, I would like to give a good service to the customer, make sure he's heard, and given some assurance so that he has that positivity of a response remains with him for a longer time.
That's fine. That's totally relevant. That's fine. So the point I'm trying to highlight over here is that a simple problem will actually lead to a simple solution. So if your problem was only that, where is my order, where is my query, you will obviously come up with a simple solution. The solution is just give the tracking ID information to the user. But it cannot be enough to truly understand the customer issue. I'll tell you how. One second. Okay, so this case study actually highlights that understand the problem truly and then frame it. Number one point, like I told you, never ever jump on to conclude the problem defining phase. Never ever jump to the solution. An abstract problem statement is as bad as an incorrect problem statement. Okay, so let's look at this particular example. For the given situation, if the user has ordered before and the shipment is delayed, we can obviously give him a reassurance that his order will reach on time. Okay, if it is a first time user, okay, see these are the questions that we asked, right? Has the user ordered before? Is the user a first time user? So because we ask these questions and then we analyze, okay, what sort of a user is this? If it is the first time user, then we educate them about the entire process and the tracking pattern, where and all he can go and track the order from. Okay, what this helps us is to learn about the customer behavior, and if at all there are some lapses from the company side. So let me give this example. If this user particularly say hailed from a state, say a particular state, let's call it Delhi. Okay, let's make it Assam. Let's make it Assam. Okay, he hailed from Assam, and if he asks us this query, where is my shipment order, and I jumped on to give him the solution, that is the tracking ID, and that's it, my job is done. It's not enough, because what happens, what if there's another user who is also from Assam, who's also feeling the same issue of this shipment delaying? Then there is a pattern, there is a bigger problem. If there is a small problem that the customer did not get his shipment is delayed, but if you ask the exact questions, if you ask where is he from, you try to understand the background about the user, you try to fine tune the problem statement, and what if you come to know through pattern, and the pattern is only because you have asked a lot of questions, that for majority of customers or for majority of users in Assam region, they are asking the same question or they are facing a delay in the shipment. Understand? So what I'm asking you is you zoom out of the problem statement, look at a bigger picture, and then if you can conclude that, okay, probably for most of the users in the Assam region or for any particular region, the shipment is getting delayed, then you know the problem is not with this one particular user, but the problem is in the supply chain or operations of the e-commerce company. So what you should do, you should probably understand this problem and beforehand try to get it solved before more users start complaining to you or start getting back to you. So this is the advantage of asking the questions, right questions, fine-tuning the question, and then getting to a solution. Because had I only asked question, sorry, had the user asked me a question and I just simply forwarded the tracking ID, I would not have been able to capture the bigger problem out there. But now that I understand there's a pattern that the problem is in that particular region, most of the shipments are getting delayed, I can solve the problem even before my future customers come to me with respect to this same problem, right? That is why most of these giants like Apple, not Apple, all the internet companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, they analyze your customer, analyze the customer behavior, because they are trying to solve a much bigger problem out there. So you might think that my problem is only tracking ID, my shipment is getting delayed. But as a company, the company might be facing a bigger issue right there, right? So I hope I'm clear. Am I clear on this? Any response?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So the basic takeaway is never jump onto a solution, because if you jump onto a solution, then the solution can be very easy in the first iteration. Great. Again, now let's talk about disruptive innovation for a little bit. There's a good saying that if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? If the system is not broken, why would you take a risk, or why would you consume your time and resources and try to fix it? But this is not relevant in today's time, because users learn to adapt to what is around them and what is given until a better alternative is introduced to them, correct? Like all our parents have basically survived the age where there was no internet. Right now, if we think, how could they survive the era without the internet? It's difficult because we are exposed to the internet era. But if the internet era was never introduced to the user, he would never ask for the internet solution, right? So the thing is, the user never knows what he wants until you actually go and introduce something to him and make him addictive. That is how you change the user behavior. So let's discuss this with an example of cab service situation in India. Okay, what was the situation for booking the cab back then? How did the users react? Like, did they face any issues back, before 2012 with the cab service situation, when there was no Ola, when there was no Uber? What was the general issues that the customer faced?
You have to go out on the road and scream and shout to call a cab, and a lot of times you don't even find the cabs on the road. So it becomes quite painful to actually cross the street and go to a place where the cab stand or an auto stand is, and then call get the guy from there. It was quite a hassle.
That is one problem, definitely,
And
right?
in bad weather, you don't even get that.
Correct. Is there some other problem that the user might have faced before 2012 with respect to cab service?
There were only taxis.
Okay, fine, rent, fine. So if you see, exactly, unreasonable charges. If you see the user problems, number one is very high cab service price here. Even now there are a lot of private companies, private agencies. They charge very high. What they say is, because I am coming from 20 kilometers and I have to specially come and pick you up, then I have to specially drop you. So
Also,
my petrol diesel charges are very high.
Also, one more thing, Ishan, the safety and the behavior of the driver.
Very, very true. Because it is not.
Because you didn't have any control over it.
You didn't have any control.
No
Correct?
reporting system, nothing.
Correct, because every agency is an individual agency, right? There is no control over the government control, or there's no centralized.
If you left any valuables in the car, you will never have a way to get back to it.
Correct. So if you see, one is very high cab prices. Second is you don't have many alternatives. That is one very big disadvantage. And third is, usually you have to pre-book such taxi services before at least a day. So say, for example, right now I want to go somewhere. Getting the cab service right now would have been very difficult. So these are some of the problems that the user faced before 2012. Now let's look at what Ola basically did. Ola disrupted the cab service market, and now in 2021, it's hard to imagine life without Ola. So I told you the user problem. The user problem are very user specific, because the user will obviously think about himself only, right? Himself and herself. The user is not going to think beyond individual needs. But how did Ola look at the same problem? Ola looked at the problem differently. What Ola identified was the entire cab service market was unorganized. Right? This is a very, very big problem. Obviously, you would not expect the user to understand this, but Ola as a company understood that the entire cab market, service market is unorganized. There are many small players offering similar services, but the market is fragmented. There is no centralization. Services will vary from region to region. In Delhi, you might get a better service. In a smaller place, you might not get good service. Then they identified the problems of various stakeholders. They understood that there are two important stakeholders. One is obviously the end user, but then cab drivers themselves are a very important stakeholders, correct? Then they identified that the number of demands for cab versus supply. The supply was not very good because it was all fragmented. I'm not saying you didn't have enough drivers or you didn't have enough cabs. I'm saying the system was unorganized. So because of that, the number of demands was way too high than what the system could supply. So this is where Ola actually came up and improved scalability, right? And then the requirement of creating a centralized, trustable brand. This is where the safety aspect, the user trust, the customer trust comes into play. As one place solution for various stakeholders, offering meaningful options in ride. And obviously the last one is real-time booking and tracking. So how Ola actually solved the problem was clear and affordable pricing, safe commute, choices at fingertips. You have choices whether you want to take mini, sedan, whether you want to have a share, right? Real-time solution for end users, obviously, because you don't have to pre-book the cabs. And for the cab drivers, obviously, you had more service opportunities and on-time payment. And what ultimately they did was they packaged the solution into a very user-friendly mobile app. So if you see the entire case study of this particular Ola service, never see the app or the final app as a solution, because there's a lot of thought process which has gone even before reaching the stage of app development or the app creation. In fact, design thinking is the process or the stage where most of the solution is finalized or most of the solution is decided. Now, finally, when you understand this from a design thinking or a design problem solving aspect, last step is you finally go to the Ola app. So the app is only going to give you a glimpse of what problem solving happened. It will never tell you the exact problem statement that was actually solved. So the Ola app, like I told again, simple, clean UI, offers various payment modes, real-time tracking, safety measures, one-click solution. Ola Lite app is there, which is storage friendly, mobile storage friendly, use of technology for easy user experience, OTP matching and all. And more importantly, they have introduced Ola Play and Ola Select, which drastically improves the user experience. So to talk to some
one more point.
Sure.
With introducing the Ola wallet and the payment services also, they made it very easy for people not to actually carry cash.
Exactly.
Looking and finding change and having that kit with the driver. So
Correct.
that is one big problem.
So they have disrupted the market itself.
So sorry, if you permit, I wanted to add one more point.
Sure, sir. Go ahead. Sure, sir.
Sir, if we take Amazon, we generally do the purchase based on the feedback and rating. So this is one critical point where this plays, feedback and rating.
Correct. Because it is helping you to improve the system, if not drastically, at least incrementally. Correct.
Yeah, of course, any system it needs some improvement. Of course, even the Ola, if some issues are there, they can give a comment or feedback. So this is an area where it has to continuously keep improving.
Correct. And that is how the feedback and all that actually plays important role. Because if it was a fragmented market, like every agency is an individual agency, there is no way you can actually contribute to the system getting developed, because there was no system. But right now, Ola has actually created a system, and that is where the disruption has happened, right? So if you look at this is how I have actually summarized, okay, the disruptive innovation coming from the design thinking perspective. When you have a detailed problem statement, you do an extensive market and user research. You come up with a solution, what I call it a disruptive solution. And what you finally have, what the users finally have in their hands is an app. Okay, now that app offers excellent user experience from the functional and visual design point of view. Functional because, like Madam has told, it has multiple option, payment option, Ola wallet, it has security, it has real-time tracking. So it offers a good functional design apart from visual design. Visual design is obviously, we'll not talk about visual design, but visual design again, like clean user interface, easy buttons. It solves the said user problems, or you can say the said user requirements. Like what we saw over here, these were probably the said user problems, what the user expressed, correct? But if you see what disruptive innovation does, apart from solving the said user problems, it also solves the unsaid user problems. It has actually organized the entire cab service market. And the experience, the user experience, what you get is way more than what the user even expected or the user even demanded. So that is how you disrupt the market. Now, what if they might have come up with an abstract problem statement with bare minimal user research or market research. The solution would have been, you can say, another cab service agency, correct? Another cab, say Fast Track, for example. Fast Track could have seen the same problem, what the user said, those three problems, and they could have come up with their own app, mobile app, right? That app also had nice visual design, okay? But the app provided the basic functionality because Fast Track is still a local private cab agency. So it does solve the said user requirement to some extent, maybe, but it does not tap on the unsaid user problems. And it's an incremental change in the process. So you see, it would not have disrupted the market, but maybe that app and that tracking would have provided a better alternative, correct? But then the way the Ola has disrupted the entire thing by creating a huge scalable network, that would not have happened. And this all starts with the problem statement, how you are defining the problem statement. Because what we as a user will see only this app, we will only see what is shown to us, correct? But the real funda or the real magic happens in the design thinking process, right? So disruptive innovation, if I have to summarize, the problem statements are not very obvious. The solution is obviously not very obvious, but the problem statements are also not very obvious. And you have to, as a design thinker, first tackle the problem statement and only then jump onto the solution. The element of disruption and competitiveness is important to stay ahead of the curve. And disruptive innovation goes way beyond the problems that the user demands or the user reflects, right? Because if you are first to deliver such a user experience, right, you are obviously going to be a market leader. Okay. If Ola has actually introduced such a sort of a thing, then Ola will eventually become a market leader, correct? Because it is giving you that first user experience which no other cab provider gave you before. So this was all about disruptive innovation. I hope I'm clear on this. Yes, sir.
Sorry, Sivaselvan.
Yes, sir.
My anticipation is there is a sizable lot which you have to cover, right?
Right, sir.
But I think looking at them as student human users, okay. If you will not mind, because I think it has been a long session for them, right? 11:45 almost.
Yes, sir.
Shall we break and can you give me a call to my cell phone, right? I will work out a strategy if you are free tomorrow.
Sure, sir. No problem. Definitely.
I think we know, right? Lunchtime, online setup, right?
Sure. So we'll do that. I actually wanted to. I didn't want to rush through the concepts just for the sake of it.
I work out a plan. Call me on my cell phone just now. You can call me, right? We will work out some additional slot we can work on. That is not an issue.
Definitely.
But we'll give them a so that they don't feel as a HCA workshop. Let us not violate human principles at the start.
Sure. Sir, can you give it 2 minutes?
Yeah. Wind up for this slot. That's it. I'll talk to you.
Sure.
Give me a call, Richard, because I lost your number, a new phone.
Okay. Sure, sir. I'll do that. Yeah. Okay. So we have two other important things. One is the user interface and what is the role of AI, artificial intelligence in HCI. So we'll cover that probably tomorrow or whenever the time permits. But because we have been talking about HCI and the design principles, right? Get feedback, the constraint and all that design principles. One feedback probably I would like to have from you. This again as part of the design principle. I want to apply it on myself as well. What do you think about the interaction we had? Was it useful? And going ahead, because there's again, like I told, a sizable amount of slides and the concepts that we have to cover, but I would not want to compromise on the interaction just for the sake of covering the slides. So any feedback on that?
A very interesting session, Nishant.
Thank you, Shilpa ma'am. So I hope the interaction made sense, because we were talking about problem solving, and I was I felt I had to give you some sort of some brain teasers here and there to understand the concept better.
Yeah,
right?
that's what makes it interesting to have real life examples.
Correct,
it was very interesting, sir. Thank you very much. And we discussed elaborately. That is the reason, like the time was not permitting. Yeah.
I will give him one more shot, sir. He is my past student there. I will not miss him, right? But I don't want to sacrifice on your lunchtime also. Okay. I will work out one more slot tomorrow, sir. We will, because his industry schedule also I have to look at. But I will surely have him one more slot this workshop. Ishan, we'll work out. You just give me a call.
Sure, sir. Fine.
The session's importance also will not get lost, right? Because the stomach will carry precedence over the mind at some point.
Correct. And because at HCI, right, I feel the domain needs a lot of examples and a lot of case studies to understand the concept. Because otherwise, at the end of the day, it's all English, right? It's all complicated English words.
A sign that it went on well is we cover only 50% of what we planned. Okay.
Sure, sir. Fine.
Go have your
one minute, I'll take, sir. So I gave you a problem. I gave the audience a problem statement. That is, how would you design an elevator in a COVID-19 situation? It's a design problem. So maybe you can probably think about it. How would you approach this problem? And we can decide. We can discuss more when we meet next, right? So thank you all. It was great interacting with all of you. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ishan. Thank you. Mercy, thanks, ma. Suppose yeah, you can break for lunch and assemble around 2:30. Yeah, okay. Attendance, be rest assured. Yeah, the beat is capturing it automatically. Some people are students. They are still not attendance. Mercy, thanks, ma. So recording is stop.
Okay.
Ishan, பேசிட்டு நாளைக்கு ஏன் ஸ்லாட்ல கொஞ்சம் டைம் கொடுக்குறேன் அவனுக்கு.
Okay, sir.
I think he is